The first thing Adaze noticed when the plane landed was that a cold did not greet her. It attacked her. Not the soft romantic cold she had seen in those YouTube videos where fine girls in fur coats laughed outside Christmas markets holding hot chocolate. No. This cold was personal. This cold had a grudge. It walked through her coat, through her blouse, through her skin, and began rearranging her bones. But Adaze did not come this far to complain about weather. She had come this far to collect what she believed was her destiny. She straightened her spine, adjusted the bone-straight wig she had fixed for 45,000 naira, and walked through the arrivals hall of Tromsø Airport in Norway like she owned the building and was considering buying the land it sat on. She was looking for a tall, handsome man holding a sign with her sister's name on it. What she found instead would take 3 days to fully destroy her. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us go back. Let us go back to where this madness was born. Back to the compound in Enugu, where 2 sisters who shared one face made 2 very different choices about who they wanted to be. If you enjoy thrilling African storytelling like this one, do us a favor right now. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell so you never miss a story, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. Whether you are in Lagos, London, Toronto, Johannesburg, or somewhere in between, your support is the reason we keep going. Now, let us get back to this story because it never starts at all. Their mother named them Chisom and Chisara, both names meaning God is with me and God answers. Their mother was a woman of faith who believed that names shaped destiny. She was not wrong, but she could not have known how differently God would answer each of her daughters. Chisom was the firstborn by 11 minutes. Those 11 minutes, some people say, took all the patience from the womb before Chisara arrived, because Chisom came into the world quiet, careful, deliberate, and Chisara came in screaming for attention, and she never stopped. They grew up in the old family compound in Enugu. Their father was a retired school teacher who smelled of chalk and integrity. Their mother sold akara at the junction and used that akara money to pay school fees without blinking. They were not rich, but they were held together by something stronger than money. Chisom understood this. Chisara resented it. By the time they were 26, Chisom had become a community health worker attached to a government clinic. She woke at 5 every morning. She treated malaria patients. She held the hands of women delivering babies in underfunded wards. She came home smelling of antiseptic and went to bed without complaint. Chisara woke at noon. Chisara's job was being beautiful on the internet, and she was very dedicated to this career. She had 11,000 followers on Instagram, and she treated each one of them like a shareholder in her lifestyle. She posted breakfast, she posted sunsets, she posted her nails, she posted her moods. She used her sister's one good handbag as a prop and returned it with a scratch and no apology. The sisters were identical, in the way that gold and gold paint are identical from a distance. Stand them side by side and you needed to study them. Chisom had a small scar above her left brow from a childhood fall. Chisara had a tattoo of a red rose on her right wrist that she got in a salon in Onitsha and told her mother was drawn with marker. Same height, same cheekbones, same nose that their father called aristocratic because he was a school teacher and believed in the dignity of description. But identical was where the similarity ended. Now here is the part where the story changes direction. Because up until this point, this is just the story of 2 sisters. Happens every day. What makes this particular story something your grandmother would tell in a low voice near a fire is the man who appeared in Chisom's life 6 months before everything fell apart. His name was Eric Mensa Thorvaldsen. Yes, that name. Say it again slowly. His father was Ghanaian. His mother was Norwegian. He had grown up between Accra and Oslo, studied veterinary medicine in Edinburgh, and eventually settled in northern Norway, where he ran a research station focused on Arctic wildlife and sustainable farming in extreme climates. He was 34 years old. He drove a truck that looked like it had survived a war. He owned a cabin in Tromsø that sat at the edge of a fjord and was so quiet at night you could hear your own heartbeat. He was also, though very few people knew this, the sole heir to the Mensa group of companies: shipping, real estate, agriculture, 11 subsidiaries across West Africa and Europe, a fortune so large his accountant had an accountant. Eric had spent the last 4 years hiding from that fortune. He had watched too many women love the Mensa name and tolerate Eric the man. He had ended an engagement in Accra when he found his fiancé had been sending his family's financial documents to her uncle. He had ended another situationship in Oslo when the woman in question referred to his cabin as temporary accommodation until he moved back to the main house. He was tired. So Eric created a test, a long, careful 6-month test. He went online, presented himself simply as a vet living in northern Norway, and began talking to women who seemed genuine. He found Chisom through a mutual contact, a Ghanaian nurse who had met Chisom at a health conference in Abuja and thought the two might get on. She was not wrong. For 6 months, Eric and Chisom spoke every evening. They talked about medicine and ethics and the way poverty follows sick people like a shadow. They argued about whether the African health system could be fixed from within or needed to be burned down and rebuilt. They laughed about small things. Chisom told him about her akara-selling mother with a pride in her voice that Eric said he could feel through the screen. Eric told Chisom about his research station, the reindeer, the huskies, the silence that had healed something broken in him. Chisom said the silence sounded like peace. Chisara, listening from the doorway on a Tuesday evening, heard the word Norway and began calculating. She had been listening for weeks of watching her sister glow in ways that Chisara did not understand and could not manufacture. Chisara had done the research. Norway was one of the richest countries in the world. The man was a vet, yes, but vets abroad earn real money. Real money meant real lifestyle. And Chisom, with her 5-year-old sandals and her antiseptic smell, was about to walk into a life that Chisara had been auditioning for her entire existence. This was not right. This was not the natural order of things. The universe had made an error, and Chisara appointed herself to correct it. The correction arrived with a DHL package on a Thursday morning. Eric had arranged everything: spousal visa, return flight to Tromsø via Oslo, a letter written with the kind of careful warmth that makes you hold the paper with both hands, an engagement ring in a small velvet box, simple and serious. Chisom sat on the veranda and cried the good kind of tears. Chisara sat beside her and smiled the wrong kind of smile. That night, Chisara made pepper soup. She had never made pepper soup in her life, so she ordered it from the woman down the street, transferred the contents into a pot, and presented it as her own labor. She made zobo for Chisom, cold and sweet, because Chisom loved zobo, and Chisara loved opportunity. Inside the zobo, she emptied 3 sleeping tablets she bought from the pharmacy by the market, telling the pharmacist she had insomnia. She did not have insomnia. She was wide awake and planning. Chisom drank the zobo and was asleep on the parlor chair within 20 minutes. She slid sideways slowly, like a building that had decided to rest. Chisara watched her without blinking. Then she moved. She carried her sister to the back storeroom, the one their father used for yams and old books, the one with the heavy padlock on the outside. She laid Chisom on a wrapper on the floor. She locked the padlock. She stood outside the door for a moment, listening to her twin sister breathe in the darkness. Then she went to get ready for Norway. She had practiced Chisom's voice, the softness of it, the way Chisom said "sir" to men twice her age, without making it sound like submission. She had studied how Chisom walked, unhurried, like someone who was not in a competition. She washed off the 16 steps of her makeup routine until her face was clean and unfamiliar to herself. She tied her hair back, put on her sister's modest traveling dress, packed her sister's prepared suitcase, and slid the engagement ring onto her finger. She looked in the mirror for a long time. She told her parents the next morning that Chisara had traveled to Port Harcourt to visit a cousin, upset about missing the journey. The parents, exhausted by years of Chisara's drama, accepted this without question. They prayed over the fake Chisom. Their mother placed her hand on Chisara's forehead and asked God to keep her daughter safe on the journey. Chisara felt nothing, or if she felt something, she swallowed it. At the Enugu airport, her heart was a percussion section, but the officers looked at the passport, looked at her face, and found nothing suspicious. The photo matched, the name matched, the visa was legitimate. Chisara walked to the boarding gate with the passport of the sister she had left locked in a storeroom. She boarded the plane. Now, here is where we must pause. Not on the story, but on the boarding pass. Because Chisara looked at it on the plane and saw something that should have made her ask questions. The destination code on the second leg of the journey, the one from Oslo to the final destination, read TOS. She did not know what TOS stood for. She assumed it was a suburb of Oslo, or a smaller city nearby. European cities have short codes. She had seen LHR for London and CDG for Paris. TOS was probably fine. It was not fine. TOS is the airport code for Tromsø, Norway. Tromsø, which sits at 69 degrees north latitude. Tromsø, which in January, the month Chisara was traveling, receives approximately 0 hours of direct sunlight per day and sits in a darkness so complete it has a name. They call it the polar night. Chisara drank the free wine on the first flight and ordered a second glass. She watched a movie. She planned her first Instagram post from Europe, something classy, the airplane window with clouds below and the caption, "Elevation is a lifestyle." She did not post it yet. She would wait until she landed and oriented herself. She would orient herself very quickly. When the small connecting plane from Oslo descended into Tromsø, Chisara pressed her nose to the window expecting lights, a skyline, the glittering evidence of European wealth. What she saw was dark. Not dark like nighttime in Enugu, dark like the world had been switched off, dark like God had gone to sleep and forgotten to leave a lamp. The plane's lights caught flashes of snow below, not gentle Christmas snow, but thick, serious, ancient snow that had been there since before her grandmother was born. When the doors of the aircraft opened, the cold came in. Chisara would later describe this moment as the first time she understood that nature had opinions about her. She stumbled into the arrivals hall, her bone-straight wig already stiffening at the ends. And then she saw Eric. He was not what she had built in her mind. Chisara had constructed Eric from the materials of fantasy. Tall, yes, he was that. Fine, yes, he had his father's Ghanaian cheekbones and his mother's Norwegian height, and the combination was unfair to ordinary men. But the fantasy included a cashmere coat, perhaps, or at minimum a wool blazer. It included an SUV idling outside with heated seats. Eric was wearing a canvas parka, the color of military equipment. His boots were serious boots, boots that had walked across things most shoes would refuse. He was carrying a thermos of hot coffee, and his face, when he saw Chisara, lit up with a joy so genuine and so specific that Chisara felt the first tremor of something she refused to name as guilt. "Chisom," he said, "you are here." He hugged her. He smelled of cold air and wood smoke and something animal, the honest smell of a man who worked outside. "Why are you shaking?" he said gently. "I told you to pack thermal layers." "The car," Chisara managed. "Let us get to the car." The car was a pickup truck with mud on the tires and a dog harness in the back seat. Chisara climbed in. They drove into a darkness so complete the headlights seemed to be arguing with it rather than defeating it. 1 hour passed, then another. The road narrowed, the trees thickened. The silence outside became a third presence in the truck. "This is still Tromsø?" Chisara asked, her voice careful. We passed Tromso 40 minutes ago, Eric said easily. We are going further north. The research station is in the interior. You remember, I told you it takes about 2 hours from the airport. Chisom knew this. Chisom had been told this over 6 months of evening conversations. Chisara had been eavesdropping from doorways and knew only the broad outline. Yes, Chisara said. I remember. Jet lag. The cabin appeared out of the darkness like something a child had drawn to represent the word cozy. Log walls, a roof heavy with snow, one warm window glowing orange from inside. It was genuinely beautiful in the way that a place is beautiful when you are visiting it in a magazine and do not have to live inside it. Chisara stepped out of the truck. Her heels sank immediately into 18 inches of snow. She looked down at her ankle boots, the ones she had bought in the market for this journey, chosen for style rather than substance. They were completely submerged. Eric noticed. He said nothing, but his eyes said something. Inside the cabin was warm from a wood fireplace. The furniture was simple and intentional. Bookshelves, a kitchen with real pots, no television that covered a wall, no velvet upholstery, no indication that luxury was a priority or even a consideration. What Chisara noticed in the corner of the main room was a pair of industrial rubber gloves hanging on a hook. She noticed them and thought nothing of them. She would think about those gloves very often for the next 48 hours. The first morning began at 4:30. Eric's alarm went off like a declaration of war. He knocked on Chisara's door, gentle but insistent. He said, "Morning devotion, love. I made porridge." Chisara pulled the blanket over her head. She heard him pray in the sitting room. He prayed in 3 languages, English, Twi, and what she guessed was Norwegian. He prayed for a long time, specifically and seriously, like a man who had a real relationship with the God he was addressing. He prayed for the research station animals. He prayed for his mother's health. He prayed for his future wife with a tenderness in his voice that Chisara heard through the door and felt somewhere in her chest that she wished she didn't have. Then the work began. She was expected to help. Eric had spoken to Chisom many times about the research station, about the daily rhythms of feeding and monitoring and record keeping. Chisom had asked questions and taken notes. She had even read 3 papers Eric sent her on sustainable Arctic farming because she found them genuinely interesting. Chisara had overheard none of this. She stood in the yard at 7 in the morning in the polar night darkness, which technically meant it was still dark because in January it was always dark, holding a bucket of feed for reindeer and not fully understanding what was expected of her because she had never been near a reindeer in her life and had not understood until this moment that reindeer were actual animals and not decorative concepts associated with Christmas hats. The reindeer were enormous. One of them knocked the bucket out of her hands with its nose. Chisara screamed. Eric turned around sharply. The reindeer startled. 2 huskies that had been watching the scene from a respectful distance began backing. "She is just being friendly," Eric said carefully. "Sita is very gentle. She knows you. You used to ask me about her by name on our calls." Chisara did not know any reindeer named Sita. She collected the bucket from the snow and said, "I told you. Jet lag." Eric watched her for one long moment. But the thing that truly cracked the wall, the thing that sent the first visible fracture through the whole performance was not the reindeer and not the prayers. It was the fish. On the second day, Eric came in from outside carrying a bucket with 4 fresh Arctic char he had caught from a hole in the ice of a nearby lake. He set them on the kitchen counter and looked at Chisara with the simple pleasure of a man who had brought home supper. She said, "Do you want me to prepare them?" He said, "You always said you love cleaning fish. You said your mother taught you from small." Chisom's mother had taught her. Chisom had told Eric this, had described the exact way their mother held the fish and talked to it before cleaning it, saying sorry to it, making Chisom laugh. Chisara had been in the room during some of those conversations, but she had been on her phone. Chisara took the first fish in her hands. She held it the way someone holds something they have been told is safe, but do not fully believe. The fish stared at her. She stared at the fish. She had absolutely no idea what to do next. She made a sound that was not a word and put the fish down and said, "Actually, I feel sick from the cold. Altitude." Eric said quietly, "Tromsø is not at altitude." She said, "Whatever the cold equivalent of altitude is." He said nothing. He cleaned the fish himself. Chisora watched him from the sitting room. His hands moved with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He hummed something low to himself. His face was beginning to carry a question it had not won when he picked her up at the airport. The question was still just a question. It became a conclusion that night. They were sitting by the fire. Eric had cooked the fish himself, and it was good, genuinely good, with a simplicity that had flavor in it. Chisara ate without comment, which was the wrong thing to do because Chisom always had something to say about food, always noticed and named ingredients, always asked how something was made because she was genuinely curious about the world. Eric looked at her across the table. He said, "Tell me something you have been thinking about." Chisom would have had an answer ready. She was always thinking about something. Chisara said, "I am thinking about this food. It is nice." Eric nodded. He said, "Chisom, you have a small scar above your left eyebrow. Where is it?" The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Chisara's hand went to her left brow instinctively. She touched smooth skin. "I hit it on the cabinet," she said. "It faded." "Scars don't fade in 6 months," Eric said. "Not that kind." He stood up from the table. He walked to the window and stood there for a moment looking at the darkness outside. When he turned around, his face was composed, but his eyes were doing something different from his face. He said, "I am going to ask you one question, and I would like you to think before you answer. Are you Chisom?" And in that moment, the whole construction, the 6 weeks of planning, the 45,000 naira wig, the stolen passport, the sleeping tablet in the Zobo, the locked storeroom in Enugu, all of it assembled itself in the air between them, and Chisara felt it pressing on her chest. She opened her mouth. Before she spoke, Eric's laptop on the kitchen counter made a sound, a notification, then another, then a rapid series. He walked to it. He read the screen. His face did not change its expression, but he pulled out the chair and sat down heavily, like his legs had made a decision he had not authorized. He turned the laptop around. On the screen was an email. The email contained a photograph. In the photograph was a young woman sitting in a cyber cafe in Enugu. She was holding a handwritten sign that said the date and these words: "I am Chisom Okafor. The woman you have with you is my twin sister Chisara. She drugged me. She locked me in a room. Please help me." In the photograph, Chisom's eyes were red from crying, and she was smiling at the same time, the smile of someone who has survived something and cannot quite believe it. Eric looked at Chisara. He said only, "I see." Chisara's body made the decision before her mind did. She was on her knees. She was talking. Fast, the way people talk when they know the structure is falling and words are all they have left. She said he did not understand. She said she had always wanted a good life. She said, "Look at me, I am even finer than her." She said she could learn to like the fish and the reindeer and the prayers. She said she could change. Eric listened. When she finished, he said, "I need to tell you something about myself, something Chisom knows and you clearly do not." He told her about the Mensa group. He said it quietly, without drama, the way people state facts that are simply facts. He told her about the shipping lines, the real estate, the 11 subsidiaries. He said he had come to Norway specifically to escape women who wanted the Mensa name and the Mensa fortune. He said Chisom had spent 6 months falling in love with Eric the vet and had never once asked about his family's business or whether he had money elsewhere. He said you came here for a golden ticket and you sat in the wrong carriage. He said this without anger. He said it like a diagnosis. Chisara sat on the floor of the cabin in northern Norway with no money, no return ticket, a stolen passport, and the slowly arriving understanding that she had left her sister locked in a storeroom in Enugu for a man who lived with reindeer by choice and had been testing her sister's character with the patience of someone who understood that character was the only thing worth testing. Eric did not call the Norwegian police. He said Norwegian police would be too straightforward. He said he had a cousin who was a lawyer in Enugu. He said that was one call he would make in the morning. He said tonight Chisara could sleep because he was a decent man and the cold outside was not something even deserved enemies should face without shelter. The return journey was worse than the arrival. Eric booked a ticket, but not a direct one. He was deliberate about this. The ticket went from Tromsø to Oslo to Addis Ababa to Lagos to Enugu, with layovers that totaled 14 hours. Chisara made the journey in winter clothes because the suitcase she had stolen from her sister contained mostly clothes appropriate for Nigeria, not for Arctic departure. She sat in the Oslo airport for 5 hours in a parka designed for -20 degrees, while other travelers watched her with the restrained curiosity of Scandinavians, which is to say, they said nothing but thought everything. She arrived in Enugu looking like a woman who had walked into one story and been expelled from it without warning. The heat of Nigeria hit her at the airport door the way the cold had hit her in Tromsø. It was her punishment from both directions. She had no money for a taxi. She borrowed a phone from a sympathetic woman outside the terminal and called her mother, who did not recognize the number. Her mother answered with the voice she reserved for strangers, careful and polite. "It is me," Chisara said. The silence on the other end was its own conversation. When Chisara finally walked into the compound in Enugu, it was early afternoon, and the sun was doing what it does in southeastern Nigeria in January, presiding over everything with a confidence that felt personal. The compound women saw her first. They watched her walk in wearing a parka. One of them called to another. They made no effort to lower their voices. She entered and found them on the veranda. Her father, her mother, and Chisom. Chisom was wearing a yellow dress and she looked infuriatingly fine. Not performed fine, not trying to look fine, just fine. The way people look when the worst thing that happened to them has already passed and they have had 3 days to begin breathing normally again. Beside Chisom stood a man in a suit with a briefcase. Chisara went to her knees on the compound floor. She called her mother's name. She called her father's name. She turned to Chisom and called her sister. Chisom said calmly, "I was in that room for 3 days." Chisara said she was sorry. She said the devil used her. She said she would make it right. The man in the suit introduced himself as Barrister Aminu, Eric's legal representative in Nigeria. He opened the briefcase. He removed documents. He said the words kidnapping, identity theft, and fraud in that order, like items on a shopping list. Their father, the retired school teacher who had named his daughters after God's faithfulness and God's answers, sat in his chair and said nothing. He covered his face with both hands. Their mother was still. Chisom let the barrister finish. Then she put her hand on his arm and said, "Wait." She turned to her sister. She looked at her for a long time. The resemblance was, as always, startling and meaningless. Same face, entirely different person. Chisom said, "I will ask Eric not to press charges, but I have conditions." The conditions were 3. Chisara would apologize to their parents formally, kneeling, not because Chisom demanded theater, but because their parents deserved to watch the performance of the accountability they had never been given. Chisara would make financial restitution for the flight Eric had wasted, and she would actually work, for 6 months at the clinic where Chisom volunteered, doing the tasks no one wanted, cleaning, laundry, the work that built the muscle that vanity could not. Chisara, who had not worked a full day in 6 years, agreed. She had no other option. She had no other card to play. She agreed. The 6 months were long. Chisara's hands, which had been the subject of 3 Instagram posts, learned the texture of hospital cotton soaked in things that were not glamorous. She learned to wake at 5. She learned that work does not negotiate and cannot be out-charmed. She lost weight, not from dieting, but from the kind of labor that does not care about your body goals. And somewhere in the 5th month, she stopped hating it. Not loving it, not yet, but she stopped fighting it the way a drowning person eventually stops fighting water and begins to swim. 8 months after the events of that Thursday morning, an SUV arrived at the compound in Enugu. The neighborhood had been waiting. They had been waiting because the way news travels in Nigerian compounds means that everyone knew the full story with 70% accuracy and embellished the remaining 30% themselves. They had been waiting for the return of whoever had come out ahead of the situation. Eric stepped out of the SUV. He was not wearing the Arctic parka. He was wearing an agbada the color of deep water, simple and serious, made from fabric that cost what it cost. He looked like what he was, a man who did not need to try. He walked past the area where Chisara was hanging washed clinic uniforms on a line. She watched him. He did not watch her back. He walked directly to where Chisom was waiting on the veranda steps in a quiet dress, with her mother and father on either side of her, and he sat down and said, "I have left Norway. I have accepted a position leading a veterinary research unit at a university in Abuja. I want to stop running from my life. I want to build something real, and I want to build it with you." Chisom looked at him for a moment. She said, "What about the reindeer?" He said, "I gave Sita to a colleague who will love her appropriately." He said it with a small smile. Chisom laughed. Their mother started crying before anyone said another word. The wedding was 4 months later. It was not a small wedding. The Mensah family does not do small. There were guests from Accra and Oslo and Lagos and London. There were 3 days of celebrations. The food was serious. The music understood itself. Chisara was there. She was not on the bridal train. She was not at the high table. She sat with the extended family on the 3rd row, and she watched her sister walk toward Eric in a dress that was everything a dress should be. And she did not cry from jealousy. She cried from something she had no previous vocabulary for. She cried from the understanding, sharp and late and real, that she had spent 26 years performing a life for people who are watching her perform it, while her sister had spent 26 years actually living one. That the soft life she had chased across continents had been assembled from stolen materials and had collapsed the moment it met reality, which is what stolen materials always do. She cried because she finally understood the akara her mother sold at the junction. Her mother had never been ashamed of that akara. Her mother had sold it with the dignity of someone who knew that honest work had a flavor that borrowed comfort could never reproduce. After the reception, when the crowd was beginning to loosen itself into the night, an older woman from the Mensah family came and sat beside Chisara. She sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, "How are you?" Chisara said, "Learning." The woman said, "Good. That is the correct answer." That is where the story ends. Not with punishment, not with prison, not with a dramatic public shaming, though the public had certainly done its work. It ends with a woman in a chair at her twin sister's wedding, crying the kind of tears that means something is finally growing where something rotten was removed. It ends with Chisom on a dance floor with her husband, laughing at something he whispered in her ear, wearing a ring that was always meant for her hand. It ends the way things always end when they go the way they are supposed to, with what belongs to each person finding its way home. And that, my people, is the story. If there's someone in your life who needs to hear it, share it with them today. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit that notification bell so the next story finds you first. Drop your location in the comments. We love to see where in the world our family is watching from. Whether you found us in Nairobi, Kumasi, Abuja, Birmingham, or Calgary, you are the reason we tell these stories. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, what is yours will find you. What is not yours will burn your hands if you hold it too long.